One complaint that we heard repeatedly was that the public education system no longer seems to be responsible to the public. There exists widespread unease that schools have become a kingdom unto themselves and little need to report to parents or to the world at large what they're doing with our kids and whether they're doing it successfully, end quote. This is not a quote from your Minister of Education. It's a quote from the report on the Royal Commission on Learning commissioned by the NDP government in the early 1990s. Over the last 30 years, it has been abundantly clear to parents that the system needs to change and that we can do better. It's why moments ago I was pleased to introduce the Better Schools and Student Outcomes Act, and if passed, this legislation would improve transparency for parents and ensure Ontario's publicly funded education system is unified in its focus to improve student outcomes now and into the future. It boils down to three key pillars: more accountability, the desire and plan to build schools faster, and improve training for educators. In that same report on the Royal Commission on Learning, we see some fascinating parallels to today's education system despite nearly 30 years later. It's why I'm excited to introduce legislation today, which should help enhance the rights of parents in our education system, as it would authorize new transparent reporting requirements and opportunities for parent participation within our schools and our board activities. I know what matters most to parents, and this is simply ensuring students achieve, that student outcomes matter most. Parents across Ontario want their kids to graduate from Ontario's education system with the skills and tools they need to succeed in life, especially in the areas of reading, writing, and math. It's why the legislation is designed to give new tools to the minister to set clear expectations and priorities for student achievement, to ensure that boards across our province are unified in their focus to prepare our students for the jobs of tomorrow. There will also be reporting requirements to boards to update and share progress on these priorities directly with parents. And to support our students who are working to achieve excellence in their education, we know that they need to get them into more modern classrooms and schools. We're responding to many families who feel like it takes too long to build a school in this province. We're going to streamline the process to approve and build schools while making it easier for students to find classrooms they need as close to home as possible. This means maximizing the efficiency of existing schools and ensuring new schools that are built meet the needs of the community they're in. But most importantly, for schools to meet the needs of the community, they need to have teachers with the skills necessary to support students. The Royal Commission also said, plainly put in 1994, and I quote, "Helping children master basic reading and writing is a critical first step, and every teacher of young children must be proficient at it." Now, we have amazing educators in our province. We are truly grateful for the work they do. But we do believe we can work better to elevate the standards and the fluency and fundamental skills like reading, writing, and math. And that's why yesterday I announced with Patrice Barnes, our parliamentary assistant, a new reading and writing strategy to lift standards. And that includes nearly 1,000 educators funded through this $180 million plan that we announced yesterday. So on top of that, I'm excited also to announce that through Ontario's historic investment in education this year, we also will be investing over $690 million more for the coming school year for the GSN funding, a 2.7% increase. We're investing $100 million in addition to what we announced yesterday to hire nearly 1,000 more teachers, specifically for de-streaming the grade 9 courses. So roughly 1,000 educators yesterday focused on reading and writing, and roughly 1,000 more frontline educators to support de-streaming starting in grade 7, 8, 9, and 10 to help the transitions into and out of the new de-stream 9 course. So that's roughly 2,000 more educators this coming school year, more teachers and better schools, and a curriculum that gets back to the basics by ensuring it is modernized, by ensuring that the government is constantly updating the curriculum to make sure it reflects the best evidence, the best research, and where the labor market needs are. And we've committed to ensuring our students have a world-class education system that they deserve to prepare them for the jobs of the future and to build a new generation of prosperity in this province. We believe through this increase of investment and overhaul of the system, we can do better, lift our standards and the ambitions of Ontario children. Thank you. Happily take some questions.
Minister, when you talk about making it so kids can go to school closer to home,
Sure.
We've seen a lot of instances where school boards shut down smaller schools and build a giant school and bus kids from all over the community to it. Are you going to try to stop that?
You know, the mission here is just to make sure we accelerate the approvals of schools. You know, right now it takes anywhere between, in some communities like in Toronto, upwards of a decade to get full site plan approval and to get a school completed from its original announcement. That is not a standard we should accept in Ontario. We have massive growth, 300,000 families moving in annually, according to federal immigration targets. We're going to have to be a lot smarter and a lot faster with how we build in this province to meet the needs of growth. There are schools today that already have pressures because of occupancy and enrollment rising. So this bill helps us streamline the approvals, expedite delivery, and think outside the box. I mean, Randy, right now there's 40 schools of roughly 4,800 that are joint-use schools. Like statistically, a small number, because the processes right now to do a joint-use school require ministry approval and a whole bunch of bureaucracy. We're trying to change the culture and challenge school boards that are very large real estate holders to think outside the box, work with a nonprofit, a YMCA, like which there are brilliant partnerships, or a municipality. Think of the recreational infrastructure we could offer to children in a school that is joint use. Thinking outside the box about joint use with other school boards. To your point, you have communities in Ontario today that have 2 schools in a small town at 50-60% occupancy. Right? Not a very efficient use of resource. Is there a way to at least enable these entities to come together to consider a joint use school while fulfilling our constitutional obligations, but allowing for that type of outside the box thinking? Now, you may argue that's not very outside the box, but in the education system that has been so static and so silent, it is. So the bill enables that type of dialogue, meaningful collaboration, so that we're able to deliver better outcomes in local schools in communities that need it most. And I think that's an important step when it comes to improving the systems.
I interpret what you just said. Kids are still going to be on buses a lot.
Well, I mean, the aim is obviously to make sure that kids have access to schools in their communities. And this bill is designed to create more local education in communities that have schools that are not being used for learning purposes. There could be schools today that sit empty. They could be rented. They could be used for administrative purposes. They could be used as a storage facility, which there are examples of. But are there other school boards, coterminous boards, that may need the school because they're facing growth that other board isn't? And because of an element of, territorialism at times, school boards don't sell the land to the other board that actually needs it based on real enrollment needs. So this is going to change the culture to say, look, one taxpayer paid for this. Let's utilize our assets, our real estate portfolio for the benefit of learning and other critical priorities of the ministry and of the government.
It seems you're coming down on trustees and school boards, directors of education. You want greater accountability. You want to elevate what their responsibilities are and educate them more. Is that a direct response to you taking over the Peel board because of racism issues, and the Oakville teacher that came to school with the large prosthetic breasts that made headlines around the world, and yet parents were angry and felt that the school board didn't react fast enough to that? Is this a direct result to those 2 instances?
I think when it comes to the school board governance improvements, it's a reminder that there are 700 trustees that are frontline, involved in often operational decisions, billions of dollars of investment, and they are responsible for literally millions of children. So if we can improve the governance training of those individuals, we can ensure that the local school boards are much more effective. Because there are too many examples in Ontario. There are some notable examples and many other small examples in the province where they're not, I think, at the standards when it comes to governance and using a more collaborative spirit when it comes to working to move the interests of kids first. In Peel, as a great case study, we had to take over a school board for the first time in the history of the province, and I believe the country, on the basis of anti-racism and broad, systematic dysfunction of school board trustees, not reflective of all. I'm just speaking about this board at that time, and moment in time in history, that were more interested in personal beefs than putting kids first. And there were a lot of kids in that school board let me assure you, that had real issues when it comes to barriers to their success. So we had to step in. I don't want to step in any further. I want school boards to be more functioning, more professional bodies. And I think many trustees, to their credit, I think they want to be part of this solution. And so that's part of it. The other element of it is, how do we ensure that the ministry priorities when it comes to student achievement are actually, there's some sort of measurement tool? Because, like, setting a priority is great, but unless we actually have a means by which to measure adherence to those priorities and implementation of it. And that's why we've included the board improvement plan. That means school boards, directors and trustees will develop a plan that aligns with the provincial priorities on student achievement. They are now publicly posting the plan. They have to do public consultations on the development of the plan. And of course, I think that creates an element of transparency. A lot of parents want to know, how is my school going to refocus on the basics, get back to what schools were all about, which is mastery of fundamental skills, the development of leaders and socially and emotionally intelligent people. And I think our schools do great work. I just think we can do a lot better. And my mission is, we should lift our standards. We've got to lift the ambitions of kids. There are too many children living in a basement, too many kids who've lost hope in our province and country. It's not their fault. We can do something better. We can work together. We can collaborate. We can better maximize the investments. We can reach higher and work harder and smarter when it comes to improving outcomes. You saw the EQAO data. That should not be a data point any of us should be proud of. And yes, while we're not the worst in Canada, that's still not enough. That's not a good reason to be complacent. So I think what the message the Premier and the government is sending is, we really just want the system to be better. And I think what's interesting is, going back to 1993, under the former NDP government, a different time, a report written by a former federal Liberal minister and a Democrat at the time, agreed that the system could be better. And so the aim today is to collaborate with everyone involved, parents, communities, the workforce, our educators, the students, and the school board leadership, to send a signal that we got to step up and do better for kids.
Last question, 2.7% increase. I mean, that's not even close to what inflation has been. Is that enough for students? I imagine the unions are going to say it's not nearly enough.
Look, we are increasing investments here, right, by 2.7%. That's over a $650 million net increase for the coming school year.
Doesn't keep up with inflation.
Well, I mean, when you look at the overall story of GSN funding, of baseline funding, it's up from the former Liberals from 27% in our ministry. We understand there are needs. Today, I'm announcing the hiring of an additional 1,000 teachers for D-Stream courses leading into and out of D-Stream courses. And yesterday, Patrice Barnes and I announced another nearly 1,000 educators. These are new investments that are going to be focused on things like literacy educator specialists and math educators. We're doubling the amount of math coaches. So we are building a plan that responds to the challenge today. The big issue we hear is young kids are not reading because they've really lacked that social development over the past few years. So what are we doing? We're following the Human Rights Commission's report on the right to read by instituting a provincial screening assessment of every young child starting in senior kindergarten to grade 2. We're going to do that for 450,000+ kids twice a year next year. We're then going to put in place roughly 700 educators, special reading specialists, teachers, to then help the very kids that are underperforming or not meeting the standard. Like, it's a very targeted plan. We have $20 million in school safety to help with more monitors, more mental health workers. We've invested in mental health. Is a huge issue right now. I know, very passionate issue for many of you today. So one of the big issues we heard and one of the priorities we heard from parents is, look, the way the school system works is you get access to services September to June, and then a parent has to scramble for supports in July and August. Like, the system was made for everyone but the kid and the patient. So we're extending funding to annualize it through the summer as we've done once prior. I think that's going to make a difference. Better consistency, more access to the same practitioner. That's a strength for a lot of these kids that have very complex needs. So we're going to increase investment. I mean, mental health, we went from $18 million to over $100 million today. So I appreciate the needs are rising, and I just want families to be assured that the new supports, the new staffing, and the overall increase of investment of literally over $600 million this coming school year alone is going to make a difference. And obviously every year, we have been able to provide additional funding for publicly funded schools because we recognize how important it is to help set these kids up for lifelong success.
Minister, you keep saying that these changes are going to refocus the system on the basics. How is that actually different from what the system is focused on now?
Well, I think right now many families are concerned that their kids are not meeting the provincial standards. EQO data, I think, is a compelling data point today that wasn't the case some years ago, certainly at the level of regression we've seen post-pandemic. The head of Dyslexia Canada yesterday, Dyslexia Ontario, Alicia Smith, spoke about roughly a third of students. They graduate. They get their physical certificate, but they still are not meeting the standards of literacy for their age. The point is that schools need to be emphasizing and focusing on strengthening skills that matter to parents, mastering the skills that are going to help young people succeed in whatever discipline they choose. Like I just want them to succeed whatever they choose. It could be from a STEM career or in the arts or anything in between. We need to make sure young people are able to achieve. And so the reason why we've put this in place, the board improvement plan to create accountability, and the emphasis on fundamental skills development, the fact that yesterday we announced over $170 million plan specific to reading, writing, and math, is because the fundamental skills have regressed, and the government is sending a clear signal to school boards, to educators, and to parents themselves that we hear you, we understand the problem, and we're investing to meet the challenge by refocusing a system on what actually is going to help your kids succeed in life.
But if I can follow up, please, if I could follow up, you talk about then the accountability to school boards for meeting these outcomes. So what is the accountability sort of hammer that you've got over the boards in this? They just have to post these plans, and is that all? Or do you have some sort of authority if the boards aren't actually meeting the expected outcomes to do something?
There are already existing authorities that the ministry have with respect to school boards fulfilling their fulfilling their obligations and their directions. And of course, we'll exercise and use those authorities if we must. The goal here today is to send a signal to school boards to refocus their energies on what matters most, which is improving reading, writing, and math skills in STEM education. There is now a public-facing accountability by posting a board improvement plan that is specific to the tactics of how they're going to implement that plan. They have to listen and consult with parents at least twice annually on the development of that plan and then post it. And of course, the ministry will be acutely interested in the adherence of every school board and work with them. My aim is through creating a culture in the ministry where they collaborate with us to lift their standards. Of course, if they don't, we will act and ensure that they implement and fulfill the clear requirement and request of parents, which is we up our game when it comes to reading, writing, and math.
Minister, first question. If schools need to get back to basics, what is it that they're doing now that you think they need to be doing less of?
Well, I think the EQO data, I think the fact that we have fundamental regression in reading, writing, and math skills is a great case study for why we need to act. I think a lot of parents feel like kids need to focus in on those skills more. There's a great deal of concern. I mean, we heard a third of kids are graduating without the literacy skills. They may get their OSSD, they may get their graduation certificate, but they don't have the skills to prepare them for life. Many of you are parents. Many of you will know as kids transition to post-secondary, the skilled trades, the kids don't feel confident or ready. That is not a reflection on them, it's a reflection on the system, on how we can do better to refocus our time in front of a child on skills development that will lead them to a good job, owning a home, and a more productive, positive life in the country. I think that's what we're signaling, and we're trying to emphasize in the clearest terms that skills focus paired with more investment and roughly 2,000 more frontline educators focused on reading, writing, and math, and those D-stream courses are going to make a big difference at the early end of a young person's career when it comes to reading in kindergarten, grade 1 and 2, as they exit elementary school in grade 7, 8, and 9, and 10 with D-stream courses. And of course, through our GSN release, you'll notice more supports for co-op placement, more hands-on learning, more opportunities for young people to use the theoretical knowledge to learn in the classroom in the workforce. And I think that's a gap that exists in Ontario. It exists in many other industrialized states and countries and provinces. I just think in Ontario, we see this as a challenge, and we're bringing forth a plan to lift our standards and, frankly, fix the problems that have existed in Ontario for decades.
Minister, you've been talking, though, and your government has been talking about back to basics since it first got elected in 2018. Yet 5 years later, you're now talking about how EQAO scores aren't where you would have wanted them to be. So what has your government done in the 5 years since election that would have led to better outcomes? Because clearly you're saying that the failure here is also being worn by your government itself.
No, I'm suggesting, Colin, that the pandemic, which was a phenomenon that wasn't experienced in Ontario alone, as you know. All children around the world face decline in scores according to the international indicators. And therefore, that's a cause of concern for parents and the government alike. And so we're stepping up with more supports, with more staffing, a modernized curriculum, a requirement in this legislation to require the Ministry of the Day to keep the legislation relevant to the job market. We have curriculum in math and science that was 10 and 15 years old by the time I updated it. A requirement for the minister to actually, as a matter of statute, a legal requirement to modernize curriculum to make sure it reflects labor market needs. And higher accountability for school boards and expectations associated with lifting student standards. I think a lot of us are concerned by that regression, but we also could be comforted today that we have a plan that refocuses our energies on improvement, on challenging the status quo, on the desire to do things better. It's a small example that is relevant for many school boards in Ontario that are having challenges finding teachers. Right? So, pardon me, I will get right to you. Right now we have in Ontario to certify an educator in the province. If you're coming from the United Kingdom for purpose of simplicity, in BC, their provincial regulator, their College of Teachers, takes roughly 40 to 50 days to process an international educator who's got all the prerequisites to work within a BC school. But in Ontario, it takes over 100 days, 110 days. My point is we can do things better. It should not take a decade to build a school in the city of Toronto or in a small community or a suburban community. So the point, the driving force, what is the motivation, our why today, is the desire to do better, to improve the efficiency of our system and refocus it on outcomes, on lifting standards, on helping kids get on track on the skills that matter. When a third of kids believe let me rephrase that, when a third of kids are not confident in their reading skills upon graduation, that is a clear signal that the system needs to be improved. And the ministry and the government since 2018 has invested in roughly 8,000 more staff. And we've increased baseline funding by 27%. We've modernized curriculum. We're about to unveil a new language curriculum this coming September that follows the Right to Read report, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, reverting to a advanced phonics system when it comes to literacy. It's going to help a lot of kids, particularly those children with special education needs, dyslexia, etc. These kids really be able to have higher standards. So in short, I want the system to be better. I want better outcomes. I want us to improve the literacy and math skills that matter to young people. And I think the signal we're trying to send to across the enterprise is we all have a role to play in stepping up to do better and help kids get on track with those fundamental skills of reading, writing, and math.
Your ministry officials had talked about the limits that some students who want to enter the trades, as an example, face in high school.
Yes.
Are you looking at perhaps peeling back the minimum required number of courses that a student needs to graduate if they want to pick a skills trade, as an example?
No, we're going to maintain the prerequisites courses for graduation. However, this legislation does enable the announcement that the Premier and I and others made some weeks ago. Following a consultation, it essentially enables us to create a direct pathway from those latter year, grade 11, into the skilled trades. So it creates that legal authority, but we still, of course, are doing the consultation with labor, with private sector, with job creators, with school boards about how do we get this right to make sure that those prerequisites are still strong and that we're allowing those kids that perhaps wouldn't graduate school. Roughly 10% of kids, like 1 in 10 kids, are not graduating. And while that rate of graduation has gone from roughly 85 to 89% over the past few years under our government, we're proud of that trajectory. I'm very proud to see that. We still have 1 in 10 kids that won't graduate. Is there a path for them and for other kids to get a credential into the skilled trades that means a good job? And I think that's sort of what we're trying to discuss today. Pardon me, Chris.
You go ahead.
I just wanted to be clear. The changes to the student accommodation framework.
For capital.
Is this a prelude to the school closure moratorium ending? I get the idea that you want them to be more proactive about finding other uses,
Sure.
not try to sell them, to find ways to avoid closing the schools. But as you've noticed, there's a lot of schools that just have not a lot of students, and if they exhaust those options, are you going to start letting school boards
Sure.
start closing schools again?
So the moratorium that exists applies only to schools that have kids in them that are learning. All the other real estate properties, schools that are rented, schools that are empty, schools that are literally storage facilities, schools that are used for administrative purposes, all of those are fair game part of today's legislation. The moratorium, today's proposal in our legislation plan doesn't deal with that. That will remain in place. The plan is to accelerate how we build schools, make it a much more quicker, seamless process, reduce the red tape, get on with building so we can get these schools built, especially built with new communities. A lot of families have said, I moved into this subdivision, there was a sign up saying school coming, and it took 5 or 6 years later to get it done. That is an unacceptable reality, and we're sending a clear signal today that we want to see better outcomes when it comes to approvals and delivery of schools. And so that'll remain in place. We're going to continue to consult with all the various stakeholders. I mean, what we want to do is we want to protect as well rural Ontario, that it was decimated under the former government when they allowed a systematic closure of roughly 600 schools under Premier Wynne and McGuinty. That came with real consequences, lasting consequences to small-town Ontario. So look, for now it's about building schools quicker. We've got in the GSN, you'll see a continued investment of over $500 million in the capital, $1.3 billion in maintenance as recommended by the Auditor General. So we're going to keep building and improving the schools in Ontario, just do them much faster.
Just to follow, my question's related to Alex, just on,
Sure.
So is this like, you know, you say it's to build schools, but you might also open it to the community, you might also open it to the market. So, you know, why is the province wanting to take control of the sale of these properties?
It's about better maximizing our real estate portfolio. Right now, you know, the government is not even, because right now the school boards are controlling their assets, we don't even know the inventory of what schools are available and not even being used for learning. So my point is, if there's a school board, and when you say, why does the government want to get involved in this? Because we want to help solve problems in other boards. You may have a Catholic board that is an unused school. It's been sitting unused for 13 years. It may be rented, it may not be. The point is it's not being used for mission-critical education. And a public school board, 1.5 kilometers away, that is desperate for a school. Massive growth, big demand on the public side. Right now, the public board has to go out and buy perhaps the most expensive real estate in our lifetime right now to buy, we're talking about $50, $70, $80 million land parcels, when there's an empty school down the block. So do you believe, or would any reasonable observer believe, I mean, not you, Laura, but as a taxpayer, do you accept that that is ludicrous? That's just not a good use of assets. It's repurposing it for learning. It's for school boards. And of course, they have to sell it at fair market value on the market like that. There's a process. The process, as we've described, is it would be offered to the coterminous board. So this example, the Catholic would offer to the public. If they decline it, it then goes to the provincial priorities list, which could be used for things like long-term care. If there's no use for education and no use that the other boards want and no use that the actual board that currently owns it has for the school, well, then we could put it to use for things like LTC or affordable housing or social housing or things like this that are actually pretty critical right now. So just about better utilizing, like we're one of the largest real estate holders in the province. We don't have an inventory. We don't have a way to force the hand of bodies to work together, stop this territorialism. It's not the case everywhere in Ontario, but honestly, there's many examples of this. Many examples of boards not perhaps being as collaborative as they should be, given that the taxpayer paid for the asset for the school. So this is about reimagining how we use, repurpose our schools for learning, and how ultimately we make sure schools are more available in communities, particularly in growing communities that need schools yesterday. And I'll tell you, I get letters from chairs almost every week pleading for a school to be built in communities that are growing so fast. And this bill helps us respond by more speed and determination to get on with building schools and get them done quickly in Ontario.
And Minister, given all that, like, I'm still not quite understanding why you wouldn't lift the moratorium, because all of this makes sense, but if you've got 3 schools close to one another that are all half full, why not let the school board say, hey, let's merge them, and then we can repurpose one for all the stuff you're talking about?
Effective advocate for school boards today. But no,
Just asking a question.
No, I understand. Look, today, this is perhaps a phased approach. The first step is let's get the legislation right. Let's create the authorities, send a new culture within the sector that they've got to work together to get schools built quicker. We're going to reduce the streamline. We've already reduced the approval process in the ministry by 50%. We did a lean review of our systems. We've cut it down by half. It's still not enough because we have municipal partners involved with site plan approvals that can take 2 or 3 years, for example, in Toronto. And that's just not, I think, and time is money. How many times have I had to reauthorize an expenditure of a school that started at $14 million, it's now $17 million because time and inflation has meant I had to produce a second approval for an incremental cost. That means the taxpayer is paying for it. So time, if we could speed up the approvals time, we can speed up the construction time, we can reduce the cost, and more importantly, more than the fiscal, get a school opened in a community closer to home for these kids, a good modern school, technology, accessibility, modern ventilation, all the things you'd expect in 2023 for kids to learn it. And we're going to continue to consult with school boards, AMO and Roma, and a variety of other municipal partners. This bill actually, for the first time, and I'm talking about our partnership with cities, it actually requires school boards to work with their municipal partner. Right now, they sort of could build schools, and we have an example where they're building a school where the municipality maybe permitted growth over here, somewhere else, yet the school's being built in a different part of the town, and there's a disagreement. So at the front end, I'm requiring some form of partnership and collaboration where the school board and the city planners have to meet early, work together on building a school. There's more, we break down the silos that are existing, frankly, within the ministry and within the school board system. I think it's a good thing. Honestly, a lot of this is common sense stuff that should have been done a long time ago. And I appreciate that there's more we can do when it comes to accelerating approvals of schools, and we're going to keep working with the sector to make that happen.
How come you didn't do the consultation before you brought in the bill? Like, you're going to do consultation now, but like, why not before the bill?
Well, I think parents have been very loud and clear on their priorities when it comes to the education system. They have made it abundantly clear to families and to government that we got to get back to the basics, refocus on reading, writing, and math and student achievement. With respect to the consultation, that's specific to capital, specific to the changes, as you were mentioning, on school building, because what we've done is we've allowed between now and the end of December, essentially the next 6+ months, to work with school boards and municipalities to come up with sort of that internal protocol of how we're going to implement this. We want to give time to boards to figure out how to transition. We want it to be successful for them. And frankly, as minister, I want to see our assets better utilized. I want to see our schools better focused on learning. So we're going to give us the time to get it right. And I think, frankly, we often hear a desire for more consultation. So we're doing it. And we're working in good faith with all the partners involved. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.